power of self-compassion and self-love, an in-depth exploration. Hands holding a heart cushion symbolizing self-love and care. We often hear advice like, be kind to yourself or love yourself first, but what do these ideas truly mean? Many of us find it easy to show compassion to a friend in need, yet struggle to extend the same warmth to ourselves. We might harshly criticize our own mistakes, even as we comfort others for theirs. This report takes a deep dive into the concepts of self-compassion and self-love, examining why being kind to oneself can be so challenging and how embracing these qualities can transform our lives. We'll explore definitions and differences, the psychological and cultural reasons behind our self-critical tendencies, the brain science of self-kindness, common obstacles like perfectionism and past experiences, and the paradoxical fact that treating ourselves with compassion actually fuels improvement and growth. Importantly, we'll also cover practical exercises to cultivate self-compassion and self-love, share real-life examples of its benefits, and discuss the long-term positive effects on our well-being and relationships. Throughout, the tone will remain warm, inclusive, and engaging, much like a caring friend guiding you through these concepts. Let's begin by clarifying what self-compassion and self-love are, and how they differ from each other. Definitions and differences. Self-compassion. In simple terms, self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you'd offer to a good friend when you suffer or make a mistake. Psychologist Kristin Neff, a leading expert on the topic, defines self-compassion as being kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings. Instead of beating yourself up for shortcomings, you acknowledge your pain, recognize that imperfection is part of the human experience, and respond with care rather than judgment. Self-compassion has three core elements. Self-kindness, being gentle and encouraging toward oneself rather than harshly critical. Common humanity, recognizing that everyone makes mistakes and experiences difficulties, so you are not alone in your suffering. And mindfulness, being aware of your negative thoughts and feelings without exaggeration or suppression. In practice, this might mean saying to yourself, "It's okay that I'm struggling, others struggle too. I will be kind to myself in this moment," instead of defaulting to self-criticism. Self-love. Self-love is a broader concept that refers to a sustained, overall appreciation and respect for oneself across time and various situations. One definition describes self-love as a state of appreciation for oneself that grows from actions that support our physical, psychological, and spiritual growth. It involves valuing yourself as a person who is inherently worthy of love and happiness. In contrast to self-compassion, which you can practice at any given moment, self-love tends to be a more stable outlook that you build up over time. Acts of self-love might include taking care of your health, protecting yourself from harmful situations, pursuing what makes you fulfilled, and generally treating yourself with respect and kindness on a daily basis. It's an ongoing attitude of caring for your own well-being and recognizing your own worth. How they differ. Self-compassion and self-love are closely related. Both involve positive, caring attitudes toward oneself, but they're not exactly the same thing. Think of self-compassion as the in-the-moment first aid you give yourself during times of pain or failure, whereas self-love is more like the overall wellness plan that you maintain for yourself over the long haul. For example, if you fail at a task or have a bad day, self-compassion is what helps you respond kindly in that specific instance, comforting yourself, understanding rather than judging. Self-love, on the other hand, is the general foundation of valuing yourself, which might lead you to make choices that nurture rather than sabotage your well-being, even when you're not in crisis. Another way to put it, self-compassion is something you do, an active way of responding to yourself when times are tough, while self-love is something you feel, an enduring sense of self-worth and affection for yourself. It's also important to distinguish healthy self-love from vanity or narcissism. Truly loving yourself doesn't mean thinking you're better than others or becoming self-absorbed. In fact, authentic self-love is about appreciating yourself without needing to compare or prove anything. It's not an ego trip. As one source explains, self-love is an honest and authentic appreciation for the self, while narcissism is all about proving that you're better than everyone else. A self-loving person values themselves but also recognizes their equality with others, whereas a narcissistic person inflates themselves at others' expense. Similarly, self-compassion is not the same as self-pity or self-indulgence. It doesn't mean feeling sorry for yourself endlessly or letting yourself off the hook for responsibilities. Instead, it's about caring for yourself while holding yourself accountable in a balanced way. We'll explore this balance more in the section on the paradox of self-kindness. In summary, self-compassion is the practice of momentary self-kindness when you're struggling, and self-love is a sustained appreciation of yourself that grows over time. Both are about treating yourself as someone who deserves care. Now that we understand what these terms mean, let's examine why so many of us find it difficult to apply these concepts to ourselves, even if we readily show compassion and love to others. Why it's difficult to be kind to ourselves. If you've ever felt that it's harder to be kind to yourself than to be kind to a friend, you're not alone. In fact, research backs up this common experience. People who lack self-compassion often report that they are much kinder to others than to themselves. It's a curious irony. We might comfort a colleague who makes a mistake, saying, "Don't worry, you did your best." But inside our own heads, we might be screaming, "How could I be so stupid?" when we make a mistake. Why is it so difficult to extend the same compassion inward? Several psychological, biological, and cultural factors make self-kindness challenging. Many people fear that being self-compassionate means becoming lazy or complacent, like a content puppy snoozing on the couch all day. In reality, self-kindness does not make you indolent. It gives you strength, negative bias, and inner critic. To start, human psychology has a built-in negativity bias. We tend to focus on flaws, dangers, and mistakes more than on positives. From an evolutionary standpoint, being highly attuned to things that are wrong, threats, errors, helped our ancestors survive. Unfortunately, this bias can turn inward, making us zoom in on our personal shortcomings and gloss over our strengths. We each carry an inner critic, that internal voice that points out our faults and often does so harshly. Many people have learned to believe that this critical voice is necessary for success. If I don't beat myself up for messing up, I'll never improve. Thus, being kind to oneself can feel unnatural or even risky, as if we're lowering our guard. We may also conflate self-compassion with letting ourselves off the hook. A common misconception is that self-compassion will make us lazy, undisciplined, or self-indulgent, as if being gentle to ourselves means we'll never strive for anything. For example, you might imagine that if you forgive yourself for procrastinating today, you'll procrastinate even more tomorrow. So instead, you mentally berate yourself to teach yourself a lesson. These beliefs and habits create real resistance to self-kindness. Early life experiences. Our difficulty with self-compassion often has roots in childhood or past experiences. If we grew up with very critical or demanding caregivers, we likely internalized the message that we must be hard on ourselves to meet standards or earn love. Children who receive affection only when they achieve or behave perfectly learn to equate self-criticism with improvement and self-worth. Worse, if displays of needing comfort were met with ridicule or rejection in childhood, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." "Toughen up, nobody likes a weakling." We may have come to see any compassion, from others or ourselves, as something dangerous or shameful. As adults, this can manifest as a deep aversion to being kind to oneself. Psychological research by Dr. Paul Gilbert and colleagues has shown that people with insecure attachment histories often fear self-compassion. They feel undeserving of kindness or worry that being compassionate to themselves is a sign of weakness. For instance, one study described how someone who as a child was scolded for seeking comfort might, as an adult, recoil when a friend or their own mind offers compassion, interpreting kindness as an insinuation that they're fragile or inadequate. In short, if your early environment taught you that only the tough survive, then self-kindness will initially feel very alien, perhaps even wrong. Cultural and societal norms. Our culture also plays a big role. Many societies implicitly or explicitly discourage overt self-love or self-compassion, equating it with selfishness, vanity, or weakness. You might have heard messages like, "Don't praise yourself, it's arrogant," or "Putting yourself first is selfish." In collectivist cultures in particular, prioritizing your own emotional needs can be seen as disrupting the harmony or as betraying familial duties. Women around the world often face additional barriers. Traditional gender roles encourage women to be self-sacrificing caregivers who put others first at all times. A woman who takes time for self-care or speaks kindly to herself may actually feel guilty or worry she'll be judged as self-centered. One author noted that in some cultures, women feel they must always appear strong and self-denying. Admitting they need kindness from themselves or others feels taboo. Even in individualistic cultures, there can be a hustle mentality that glorifies relentless self-critique and perfectionism while dismissing self-compassion as soft. These societal attitudes can condition us to be much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on a friend. Psychological fears and beliefs. On a psychological level, people often carry specific fears about self-compassion. Besides the fear of laziness mentioned earlier, there's the fear of losing one's edge or standards. High achievers and perfectionists might secretly believe, if I cut myself any slack, I'll become average or let my standards drop. Being kind to oneself can feel like settling for mediocrity. Similarly, many fear that self-compassion is equivalent to self-pity, that it means wallowing or making excuses rather than owning up to mistakes. However, these fears are based on a misunderstanding of what self-compassion really is. In truth, self-compassion doesn't mean abandoning growth or responsibility. It means supporting yourself as you grow and when you take responsibility. We will later see how the research overwhelmingly shows that the gentler approach actually boosts improvement rather than hindering it. But until one experiences that, the belief that I need to be my own drill sergeant can be a stubborn obstacle. In summary, being kind to ourselves is difficult due to a mix of factors. Our brains focus on flaws, internalized voices of criticism, upbringing that discourage softness, cultural norms that prize stoicism or selflessness, and myths that equate self-compassion with weakness. We become our own harshest critics, often without even realizing there's an alternative. The encouraging news is that these tendencies are not fixed. They are habits of mind and can be changed with understanding and practice. To further understand both the challenge and the solution, let's look at what happens in our brains and bodies when we engage in self-criticism versus self-compassion. What happens in the brain and body with self-criticism versus self-compassion? Why does beating ourselves up feel so instinctive? And what effect does it actually have on us? The answers lie partly in our biology. When we harshly criticize ourselves, we activate the brain's threat defense system, the same response that would fire if we were in real danger. In contrast, when we practice self-compassion, we engage an entirely different system, the caregiving or self-soothing system, which can calm us and promote well-being. Let's break down the neurobiology of these reactions in simple terms. The threat response, amygdala activation and cortisol. The moment you detect a threat, whether physical or emotional, your brain's alarm bell, the amygdala, goes off. This almond-shaped region in the brain's limbic system is designed to keep you safe by quickly mobilizing a fight-or-flight response. If you encounter a bear in the woods, the amygdala is crucial for triggering adrenaline and the stress hormone cortisol to help you run or defend yourself. But here's the catch. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between an external physical threat and an internal, self-generated threat. When you launch into severe self-criticism, "I'm so stupid, I've ruined everything," your brain perceives your own harsh words and feelings as a kind of attack on your self-concept. In effect, you become both the attacker and the attacked in an internal war. The result? The body reacts with stress. Heart rate and blood pressure jump, adrenaline spikes, and cortisol floods the system. This is the classic fight, flight, or freeze mode. Muscles tense, the mind fixates on the threat, in this case your perceived failure or flaw, and non-essential functions shut down. Short term, this response can make you feel on edge, agitated, or emotionally flooded. If self-criticism is chronic, over time it can contribute to issues like anxiety, constant fight-flight arousal, depression, learned helplessness from freeze or shutdown responses, and even physical health problems from elevated cortisol. It's sobering to realize that the body treats harsh self-judgment like a crisis, hammering us with stress chemistry as if we were under attack. because in a very real sense, we are under attack from within. Have you ever noticed that after a bout of berating yourself, you might feel exhausted or have a pit in your stomach? That's the physiological fallout of the self-criticism system. We sometimes turn to unhealthy coping, like overeating, alcohol, excessive TV, to numb that stress, which can create a vicious cycle of shame and further self-criticism. The self-soothing response, oxytocin in the care system. Now let's look at the radically different response that self-compassion can activate. Humans and other mammals have a built-in caregiving system, the kind of warm, connected state that arises, for example, when a parent comforts a child or friends support each other. At the biochemical level, one of the star players of this system is oxytocin, often nicknamed the love hormone or cuddle hormone. Oxytocin is released during positive social bonding moments, like a mother nursing her baby, a hug from a loved one, or even gentle physical touch and kind words. Remarkably, research suggests that thinking compassionate, comforting thoughts toward oneself can trigger oxytocin release just as if someone else were offering support. When you soothe your own pain with understanding and kindness, you tap into this mammalian caregiving circuitry. What does increased oxytocin do? It counteracts the stress response. It leads to feelings of safety, calm, and trust, and it physically reduces anxiety and fear by lowering amygdala activity. In other words, oxytocin helps put the brakes on that alarm system. It also has direct effects like lowering cortisol levels and blood pressure. Think of how you physically relax when someone gives you a warm hug in a moment of distress. Self-compassion can elicit a similar physiological calming, because your brain doesn't entirely care whether kindness comes from someone else or from your own self-talk. To the body, kindness is kindness. In one illustrative study, participants were guided to imagine receiving compassion and warmth. For example, visualizing someone who loves them unconditionally, or repeating kind phrases to themselves. The results were striking. Those who engaged in this self-compassion imagery exercise showed a significant drop in cortisol levels and an increase in heart rate variability compared to a control group. Heart rate variability, HRV, is a measure of how much your heart rate fluctuates. Higher HRV generally indicates a more relaxed and adaptive state. The increase in HRV suggested that people's bodies were shifting out of fight or flight and into a calmer mode. In essence, by giving themselves compassion, their hearts literally opened up and became less defensive. This is powerful evidence that self-compassion isn't just a nice idea. It produces real, measurable changes in our stress response, balancing the brain, prefrontal cortex, and emotional regulation. Over time, practicing self-compassion doesn't just shift your immediate hormones, it can also start to rewire your brain. Neuroscientists talk about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and pathways based on what we repeatedly do. When you frequently replace self-criticism with self-compassion, you strengthen neural pathways associated with emotional regulation and empathy, many of which reside in the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and moderating emotions. Think of the prefrontal cortex as the wise coach or nurturing adult in your brain that can calm the panicky child, the amygdala, when needed. Self-compassion practice reinforces the prefrontal cortex's capacity to soothe distress. Studies using brain imaging have found that mindfulness and compassion exercises can increase activity in brain regions linked to attention and emotional control, while decreasing reactivity in fear and alarm centers. In practical terms, this means the more you practice self-compassion, the better you get at it neurologically. Your brain becomes more efficient at turning down the self-critical noise and engendering a sense of safety. Over time, you may notice that you recover from upsets faster, or that your inner critic's voice loses some of its power because your brain has learned a new way to respond. Quieter default mode network. Less rumination. Another interesting brain effect involves the default mode network, DMN. The DMN is a network of brain regions that becomes active when our minds are idle or daydreaming. Often, it's when we start to ruminate, replay memories, or worry about the future. A lot of self-critical thought happens in this default state. Think of lying in bed spiraling over something you said or did. Mindfulness and compassion practices have been shown to quiet down parts of the DMN that are associated with self-judgment and negative rumination. By bringing our focus to the present moment in a kind way, we essentially give our busy self-critical mind a break. This means fewer loops of, I'm not good enough, running in the background. People high in self-compassion tend to ruminate less and are able to redirect their thoughts more constructively. In summary, self-criticism and self-compassion fire up very different systems in the brain and body. Self-criticism triggers the threat response, led by the amygdala and stress hormones like cortisol, which puts us in fight or flight and, if prolonged, wreaks havoc on our mental and physical health. Self-compassion activates the care system, releasing oxytocin and activating brain regions that help us feel safe, connected, and calm, thereby shutting down the alarm and enabling healing. With practice, self-compassion can even rewire our brains for greater emotional resilience and less negative chatter. Understanding these mechanisms underscores why the seemingly soft approach of self-compassion is actually a wise strategy for well-being. Our biology is wired to support it. Now that we've seen the science, let's talk about the common challenges people face in trying to be more self-compassionate and how to overcome those obstacles. Common challenges and obstacles to self-compassion. Even once we understand self-compassion, actually practicing it can be tough. There are several common hurdles that tend to get in the way when we try to be kinder to ourselves. Here are some of the most frequent challenges, along with explanations. Perfectionism and high standards. Perfectionists often struggle the most with self-compassion. If you tend to set extremely high standards for yourself, you might feel that anything less than flawless is failure. So offering yourself kindness for an imperfect performance feels wrong, almost like accepting defeat. There's a belief that self-compassion equals lowering the bar or settling for less. For example, someone might think, if I tell myself it's okay that I messed up, won't I just become content with being second-rate? In truth, striving for excellence and being self-compassionate are not mutually exclusive, but the perfectionist mindset treats them like oil and water. This can lead to an all-or-nothing mentality where only total success warrants kindness, and anything short of that is met with self-criticism. Breaking this pattern is hard because the perfectionist's identity is often wrapped up in being above average. Self-compassion can feel like embracing a lesser version of oneself, which the perfectionistic ego resists strongly. The paradox, however, is that perfectionism without self-compassion tends to backfire, leading to burnout and lower performance over time, a point we'll revisit. Past trauma or childhood conditioning. As discussed earlier, those who grew up with very critical, abusive, or emotionally unsupportive environments may find self-compassion almost alien. If love always came with strings attached, like achievement or compliance, or if showing vulnerability led to punishment, the brain associates compassion with danger or shame. In these cases, even attempting self-kindness can trigger a backlash of difficult feelings, a phenomenon some therapists call backdraft. It's similar to when you open a door in a burning house and a rush of fire comes out. Opening the door to self-compassion can initially unleash stored pain. For instance, telling yourself you're okay as you are, you're human, might unexpectedly make you sob or feel very uncomfortable because it contrasts so starkly with years of self-judgment. People with such histories might say that self-compassion feels fake, uncomfortable, or even painful. They haven't had the experience of gentle acceptance, so when they try to give it to themselves, it almost hurts. It highlights the compassion they missed in the past. This obstacle requires patience and often support from a therapist or group. It can be overcome, but gradually, like learning a new language after years of speaking another. Social comparison and competition. We live in a highly competitive society where we constantly compare ourselves to others, on social media, at work, or school, in our social circles. This habit of comparison can fuel self-criticism and impede self-compassion. If we see others as doing better, more successful careers, happier relationships, more achievements, we might feel we don't deserve compassion until we measure up. Likewise, in environments like competitive workplaces or academic programs, People fear that easing up on self-criticism will make them lose their competitive edge. There's also envy and shame at play. Others are doing fine. What's wrong with me? Instead of compassion for ourselves in struggle, we heap on judgment for not being as good as X or as accomplished as Y. Society often rewards being the best, so we internalize the idea that we only have value in comparison to others. This mindset makes self-love conditional. I'll love myself when I'm as thin as her, as rich as him, as accomplished as them. It's a huge obstacle because there will always be someone seemingly ahead in some area. Overcoming it involves consciously redirecting focus from external comparisons to personal growth and intrinsic worth. Cultural and societal norms. Cultural upbringing can either support or hinder self-compassion. In many Western cultures, rugged individualism and self-esteem based on achievement are common. People might worry that self-compassion is a form of self-centeredness or that it goes against a strong work ethic. In more collectivist cultures, putting the group's needs first is paramount, and tending to one's own emotional needs might be seen as selfish. For example, a mother in a traditional setting might feel she must always sacrifice for her family, and that taking time to care for herself, or even asking for help, is a dereliction of duty. Such norms create guilt around self-care. Additionally, certain groups face stereotypes that add pressure not to show any struggle, e.g., expecting men to always be tough and not coddle themselves, or expecting people in marginalized groups to constantly prove their competence. One psychologist noted that if you live under a stereotype, say, women are too emotional to be leaders, you might fear that being openly self-compassionate, admitting when you're upset or need a break, could reinforce that stereotype. In other words, societal judgment can make self-compassion feel unsafe. The key to overcoming cultural obstacles is reframing self-compassion not as selfish, but as a way to strengthen oneself to better fulfill one's roles. Just as you can't pour from an empty cup, taking care of your own emotional health ultimately enables you to contribute more to your family, team, or community. We'll touch on this again in the summary. Misconceptions about self-compassion. Finally, a very pervasive obstacle is simply misunderstanding what self-compassion really means. Many people confuse self-compassion with making excuses, self-pity, or losing accountability. They imagine that being kind to themselves would mean saying, "Oh, it's fine, I messed up, who cares," and then slacking off or never improving. They might label it as wallowing or feeling sorry for oneself. These misconceptions act like mental blocks. No one wants to be seen or see themselves as self-pitying or irresponsible, so they avoid anything that sounds like it. In reality, self-compassion is not about pity or avoiding responsibility. It's about acknowledging reality, including your role in mistakes, without adding unnecessary self-condemnation. It's entirely possible to be accountable and driven and kind to oneself at the same time. In fact, as we will see next, the research shows self-compassionate people often have higher standards and personal responsibility because they don't waste energy on berating themselves and instead focus on constructive improvement. Nonetheless, until someone understands this, the myth that self-love equals selfishness or weakness will block their attempts to practice it. Overcoming this obstacle often starts with education, learning what self-compassion truly is and isn't by reading, attending workshops, or even just hearing others' experiences. It's clear that practicing self-compassion isn't always straightforward. There are psychological allergies to it, so to speak. But knowing these common obstacles is half the battle. When you find yourself resisting self-kindness, you can pause and think, this is that fear of being lazy kicking in, or this discomfort might be because I never learned this as a child. By identifying the challenge, you can begin to work with it. In the next section, we confront one of the biggest myths head-on, the idea that being hard on oneself is the key to success. Counterintuitive as it may seem, gentleness is often far more effective. Let's explore this paradox of self-kindness. The paradox of self-kindness. Does self-compassion undermine growth or fuel it? Many people carry the belief that being hard on themselves is necessary for improvement. It's easy to understand why. Perhaps you've motivated yourself to study or work harder by thinking, "I'll never succeed if I slack off. I have to push more." or chastised yourself for a mistake to ensure you don't do it again. The underlying logic is that self-criticism keeps us in line and propels us to greater heights, while being kind to ourselves would lead to complacency. This belief is pervasive. As noted earlier, the number one reason people resist self-compassion is the fear of becoming lazy or losing their edge. However, a growing body of research reveals a surprising truth. Far from making us lazy, self-compassion actually enhances motivation, resilience, and progress. This is the paradox of self-kindness. Treating yourself with warmth and understanding turns out to be a more sustainable and powerful motivator than self-punishment. Why might this be the case? Imagine an athlete with two different coaches. Coach A thinks berating and punishing the athlete for mistakes will yield results. Every error is met with yelling, every lost match with cold disdain. Coach B, on the other hand, responds to failures with encouragement, pointing out what can be learned, reassuring the athlete that it's okay to fail, and urging them to try again. Under Coach A, the athlete might initially try hard out of fear, but over time they become anxious, discouraged, or burnt out. They might dread practice or even give up after repeated negative experiences. Under Coach B, the athlete feels supported and safe to take risks, is more likely to enjoy the sport, and bounces back from losses with renewed effort because their self-worth isn't destroyed. We all have an inner coach, and self-compassion essentially makes that coach a supportive one rather than a tyrant. Scientific findings back this up. Dr. Kristin Neff and colleagues have found that self-compassionate people are not in fact complacent or unambitious, quite the opposite. They tend to have what's called a learning goal orientation or growth mindset. They see setbacks as opportunities to learn rather than as definitive judgments of their worth. For example, a self-compassionate student who fails a test might think, "This material was really tough. A lot of people struggled. Now that I know what I'm weak in, I can study those areas and improve for next time." That mindset is motivating and leads to action, studying more effectively, in contrast to a self-critical student who might think, "I'm so stupid, I'll never get this. What's the point of trying?" and then feel too demoralized or fearful to re-engage with the material. Research has shown several concrete ways self-compassion fuels improvement. Greater motivation to correct mistakes. When you aren't consumed by shame or self-loathing after a failure, you have more mental energy and hope to try again. One study noted that people with higher self-compassion were more motivated to learn and change for the better and to avoid repeating mistakes. They acknowledged their errors but didn't equate themselves with the error, so it felt safe to admit and address it. This means they're more likely to say, "Okay, I messed up. How can I fix this?" Instead of "I messed up, I'm terrible and there's no fixing me." The former attitude clearly leads to more productive outcomes. Higher personal standards and willingness to take risks. It might sound surprising, but self-compassionate individuals often maintain high standards for themselves. The difference is they are kind to themselves and root to those standards. They don't settle for mediocrity. They still aim high. But crucially, they don't fall apart if they fall short. This actually allows them to take on challenges and risks that perfectionists or highly self-critical folks might avoid. If you know you will treat yourself kindly even if you fail, you're more likely to, say, apply for that competitive job or start that difficult project, because the prospect of failure isn't the end of the world. On the other hand, if failure means an internal beatdown, you might stick only to what's safe. Research supports that self-compassionate people have less fear of failure and a greater willingness to try again after failing. They also tend to be driven more by intrinsic motivation, doing things because they care or find meaning in them, rather than by external validation or fear of punishment. This intrinsic motivation is generally more powerful and enduring. Resilience and adaptability. Self-compassion has been linked to higher resilience, meaning the ability to bounce back from difficulties. Because self-compassionate people respond to setbacks with care rather than catastrophizing, they recover emotionally more quickly. This resilience translates into a willingness to keep going. For instance, entrepreneurs or creatives who practice self-compassion might handle rejection or criticism of their work better, using it as feedback rather than a reason to quit. In relationships, someone who is self-compassionate can admit their mistakes and apologize, leading to growth in the relationship, instead of being defensive or wallowing in self-hate, which stalls progress. In essence, self-compassion is correlated with emotional strength. It's sometimes described as a form of mental toughness that is actually kind, not harsh. You can think of it as the sturdy roots that keep a tree standing in a storm. The tree bends and sways, adapts, but doesn't break because it's securely rooted in self-kindness and acceptance. A real-life example of this paradox can be seen in education. Students encouraged to respond to their failures with self-compassion, e.g., writing a letter to themselves after a bad grade, expressing understanding and a plan for improvement, often end up studying longer and more effectively for the next exam than those who dwell in self-criticism. The self-compassion gives them emotional balance to analyze what went wrong without losing self-confidence. Similarly, in sports and professional realms, many top coaches and leaders are shifting from old-school harsh methods to more compassionate coaching because they see that athletes and employees perform better when they feel supported rather than terrorized. It turns out that a sense of safety is the launchpad for excellence. When you know mistakes won't cost you your self-worth, you're free to fully engage, be creative, and push limits. Let's use a metaphor to drive this home. Imagine your mind is a garden and you want it to bear fruit, skills, achievements, growth. Self-criticism is like trying to force plants to grow by withholding water and beating the soil. You might think you're toughening up the plants, but in reality you're creating drought and damage. Self-compassion is like regularly watering and tending to the garden, pulling weeds gently, adding fertilizer, giving sunshine. The latter approach might seem slower or softer, but it's the only one that truly allows growth. No plant ever grew faster because someone shouted at it or ignored its needs. Plants grow when nurtured. Likewise, humans grow best under conditions of support and encouragement, not relentless pressure. It's important to clarify that self-compassion doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook from accountability. You still acknowledge mistakes and areas for improvement. You just do so without self-hatred. In fact, because you aren't busy defending your ego, as often happens with self-criticism, you can be more honest with yourself about what needs work. And when criticism comes from outside, a self-compassionate stance helps you not get devastated by it. You can consider it with a clear head, rather than taking it as a personal condemnation. To illustrate the paradox with a brief story, consider two friends, Anna and Bella, who both decide to start running. Anna is very hard on herself. If she skips a day or runs slower than usual, her inner voice shouts, "You're so lazy. You'll never get fit at this rate." Sometimes this motivates her to push harder the next day, but more often she starts dreading running because it's tied up with feelings of failure. Eventually, a string of harsh self-rebukes after a tough week makes her think, "What's the use? I'm just not cut out for this," and she quits running altogether. Bella, on the other hand, tries a self-compassionate approach. When she misses a day, she gently thinks, "It's okay. I've been tired. I'll get back on track tomorrow. One off day doesn't define me." She encourages herself the way she'd encourage a friend. "You can do this. You've been doing well overall. It's understandable to have ups and downs." As a result, Bella doesn't waste energy feeling ashamed, and she continues running regularly. Over time, Bella's fitness improves markedly, while Anna's does not. Bella wasn't lazier for forgiving herself. She was more persistent and resilient. This is the paradox in action. Kindness led to consistency and progress, whereas harshness led to burnout and giving up. We also have scientific evidence on the larger scale. Self-compassion is associated with greater emotional well-being, optimism, and resilience across many studies, and specific experiments have shown that inducing self-compassion can increase people's motivation to correct mistakes and pursue healthy behaviors. Moreover, when people do achieve things, those with self-compassion tend to enjoy the accomplishment more rather than dismissing it or immediately moving the goalposts, which hardcore perfectionists often do. This positive reinforcement further fuels healthy motivation. In conclusion, the fear that, if I'm kind to myself, I'll never improve, is not only unfounded, it's backward. Self-kindness is actually a more effective fuel for self-improvement than self-criticism. Being your own ally rather than enemy provides a stable platform from which you can grow, learn, and reach your goals. Once you experience this, it truly feels like a paradox resolved. You improve because you accept yourself, not because you reject yourself. With this understanding, we can now focus on how to cultivate self-compassion and self-love in practical ways. After all, knowing the benefits is one thing, building the habit is another. In the next section, we'll cover concrete exercises and methods, short-term and long-term, to train these vital skills. Exercises and practical methods to cultivate self-compassion and self-love. Developing self-compassion and self-love is very much like building a muscle. It takes regular practice. The good news is there are many concrete exercises, both simple daily habits and deeper practices, that can gradually rewire your mindset toward greater kindness and acceptance of yourself. Here are 10 practical exercises, a mix of short-term daily practices and longer-term strategies you can start incorporating. 1. The self-compassion break, mindful kindness in the moment. When to use: whenever you're feeling stressed, upset, or caught in self-criticism in the moment. How to do: pause for a minute when you notice you're in distress. First, mindfully acknowledge your feelings. Say to yourself, "This is a moment of suffering," or "I'm really feeling bad right now," naming the emotion: hurt, anger, fear. This is the mindfulness component. You're consciously recognizing your pain instead of ignoring it. Next, remind yourself of common humanity. Tell yourself, "Suffering is a part of life," or "I'm not alone, others feel like this too." This helps break the isolation we often feel with our problems. Finally, extend kindness to yourself. Put a hand on your heart or give yourself a mental hug and say comforting words such as, "May I be kind to myself in this moment," or "I forgive myself, I'll try to learn from this." This 3-step break, mindfulness, common humanity, self-kindness, is a quick hit of self-compassion that you can do anytime, even in the middle of a workday. It only takes a minute or two, but it can diffuse the intensity of self-critical thoughts and bring immediate relief. Many people find physically touching their heart or cheek during this exercise adds a calming oxytocin boost. 2. Supportive self-talk and friend voice practice. When to use: daily, during self-reflection, or whenever negative self-talk arises. How to do: deliberately cultivate a kind inner voice by speaking to yourself as you would to a dear friend. One way to practice is to write down a self-critical thought you've had, e.g., "I messed up that presentation, I'm such an idiot," and then write a response to yourself from a compassionate friend's perspective. "You're not an idiot. You did your best under tough circumstances, and there were good parts in that presentation. Here's what you could improve next time." Alternatively, literally imagine a friend sitting across from you who is going through exactly what you are. What would you say to comfort and encourage them? Then try saying that to yourself, either out loud or in your mind. This may feel awkward at first, but repetition trains your brain to default to this friendlier tone. Another quick approach: create a couple of go-to compassionate phrases to counter your common self-criticisms. For example, if you often think, "I'm such a failure," prepare a phrase like, "I'm human and I have strengths and weaknesses like everyone. Failing at one thing doesn't make me a failure as a person." Whenever the negative tape starts, consciously swap in the kinder tape. Over time, your inner dialogue will shift toward more gentleness. 3. Soothing touch or self-hug. When to use: in moments of anxiety, shame, or when you notice physical tension from stress. How to do: our bodies can sometimes understand compassion better than our minds. If you're feeling upset or berating yourself, try a simple physical gesture of care. For instance, place one or both hands on your heart, or gently rub your arm, or even give yourself a hug by wrapping your arms around your shoulders. You can also try lightly placing a hand on your cheek or clasping your hands together in a comforting way. It might feel a bit silly initially, but these gestures tap into the mammalian caregiving system. As noted before, the body responds to warmth and touch by releasing calming hormones. So, take a few deep breaths as you do this and perhaps say something soothing internally. "It's okay, I'm here for you." Notice any shifts, perhaps your heartbeat slows or you feel a tiny bit more grounded. This exercise is great because it's quick and always available. Your own hands can be tools for self-care. Some people even develop a subtle version they can do in public, like gently holding their own hand or cupping one hand in the other in their lap, as a reminder, I'm supporting you. 4. Self-compassion journaling. Daily reflection. When to use, in the evening or any time you like to journal, ideally daily or a few times a week. How to do, set aside 10 minutes to write in a journal about anything that caused you difficulty or any mistakes you made that day. Through the lens of self-compassion. A structured way is to divide it into 3 parts, corresponding to the components of self-compassion. 5. Mindfulness. Write about how you feel and what happened without exaggeration or judgment. E.g., today I missed a deadline and I feel anxious and disappointed. It was an overwhelming day and I'm really frazzled. 6. Common humanity. Remind yourself on paper that you're not alone. E.g., everyone misses deadlines sometimes. I know my colleagues have struggled with timelines too, especially under pressure. This is a very human thing to slip up on. 7. Kindness. Write some kind, understanding words to yourself. E.g., I know you tried your best. It's understandable that you're tired. It's okay. You can ask for an extension or prioritize differently tomorrow. I still appreciate you, and you are not a bad person for this. This exercise is like having a daily debrief with a compassionate mentor, except you're both the mentor and the mentee. It helps to concretize compassionate thoughts on paper. Over time, rereading these entries can show you patterns of how you overcame tough days, reinforcing your self-supporting voice. Number 1. Write a self-compassionate letter, perspective shift. When to use? Occasionally, especially for a specific lingering issue, guilt, or self-judgment you've been carrying. How to do? This is a powerful exercise often recommended by therapists. Think of something about yourself that you feel really bad about. A mistake, a flaw, or an aspect of yourself you're very self-critical about. Now write a letter to yourself from the perspective of an unconditionally loving friend or mentor. In this letter, imagine this friend knows all your struggles and loves you regardless. They acknowledge your pain and gently challenge any distorted negative self-talk. For example, if you're upset about procrastinating, the letter might say, Dear Your Name, I know you're disappointed that you procrastinated on that project. I've seen how hard you've been working and how tired you are. Anyone in your shoes might have delayed. It doesn't mean you're lazy or incapable. I believe in you. You have accomplished so much, and this setback doesn't change that, and so on. Really allow the tone to be warm, understanding, and supportive. After writing it, set it aside for a bit, then come back and read it as if receiving compassion from someone else. People often find this brings a new perspective and emotional relief. It can even be emotional, like hearing what you needed to hear. If writing isn't your thing, you can do a similar exercise by recording a voice memo speaking as a compassionate friend to yourself and then listening to it later. 2. Gratitude and appreciation for yourself. When to use, daily or weekly, especially if you struggle with feeling not enough. How to do. We've all heard of gratitude journals for things in life, but this twist is to list things you appreciate about yourself. Each day, jot down 3 things you did well or qualities you value in yourself. They can be very small. I made a tasty omelet for Breck. I listened patiently when my friend called in distress. Or big. I'm proud of how I handled that job interview. The key is to regularly direct your focus toward your strengths, efforts, and positive qualities, however minor they may seem. This practice counteracts the bias of only seeing your faults. It helps build self-love by reinforcing an appreciation for who you are. If daily feels like too much, start weekly. On hard days, you can reread past entries to remind yourself that you have goodness and successes to draw on. Over time, you're training your mind to give equal airtime to self-praise as it does to self-criticism. For an even quicker daily habit, you can also do this orally. Each night when brushing your teeth, or each morning, think of one thing you did or handled yesterday that you're proud of, and mentally give yourself a little congratulations. 3. Mindfulness, meditation, and loving kindness, metta practice. When to use. Ideally as a routine, daily or a few times a week, or whenever you have a few minutes to center yourself. How to do. Mindfulness meditation in general strengthens your ability to observe thoughts and feelings without getting hijacked by them. This is very useful for self-compassion because it creates a mental pause in which you can insert kindness rather than automatically judging yourself. You can start with simple breath-focused meditation. Sit quietly for 5 to 10 minutes, pay attention to the sensation of breathing, and whenever your mind wanders into self-critical thoughts or any thoughts, gently bring it back to the breath. This trains gentleness and focus. In addition, a specific form of meditation directly cultivates compassion. Loving kindness meditation, LKM, traditionally called metta. In LKM, you silently repeat phrases of goodwill, first towards yourself and then expanding to others. A classic set of phrases: may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. You say these slowly, trying to evoke heartfelt intention. Then you might say the same for others: may you be safe, happy, healthy, at ease. But importantly, many people, especially those low in self-love, find it hardest to send these wishes to themselves. That's exactly why practicing it is helpful. If it's challenging, you can start by imagining yourself as a child or remembering that you, like anyone, are deserving of these wishes. There are many guided meditations available via apps or online, specifically for self-compassion and self-love, which can walk you through this. Even a 10-minute daily practice has been shown to increase compassion over time. This exercise is more long-term. Its effects accrue with repetition, subtly shifting your baseline attitude to be kinder and more present. 4. Embrace imperfection. Behavioral challenges. When to use, from time to time, especially if you struggle with perfectionism or fear of failure. How to do. This is like exposure therapy for perfectionists. Deliberately allow yourself to do something imperfectly and practice not freaking out about it. For example, if you always need your work emails to be immaculately phrased, try sending one that is polite and clear, but not endlessly polished. If you're used to wearing makeup to hide any blemish, go one day naturally. If you typically try to do everything yourself, allow yourself to say no or ask for help, even if that feels like admitting you're not Superwoman, Superman. When you do these things, pay attention to the discomfort that arises, probably the critical voice saying, "This isn't good enough." Then actively respond to that discomfort with self-compassion. Tell yourself you're brave for trying this, and remind yourself why it's healthy. For instance, it's okay that the email wasn't perfect. My value doesn't come from being flawless. I'm human and I deserve peace, not constant stress over small details. This exercise helps break the rigid all-or-nothing thinking by proving that the world doesn't end when you're imperfect. And in fact, people often respond just fine. Over time, it can loosen the grip of perfectionism and make it easier to extend kindness to yourself for normal human errors. 5. Self-care routines and setting boundaries. When to use, long-term, as a lifestyle habit, especially important if you tend to neglect your needs. How to do. While self-care might not seem like a mental exercise, it's a critical practice of self-love in action. Evaluate areas of your life where you can better take care of yourself. Are you getting enough sleep? Eating regular, nourishing meals? Taking breaks when you're overworked? These basic acts send signals to yourself that you matter. Pick one area and create a routine around it as an act of self-love. For instance, establish a calming bedtime routine if you're chronically exhausted, perhaps tea and reading instead of late-night email. Or commit to a form of exercise you enjoy, like gentle yoga or walks, a few times a week, explicitly framing it as caring for your body, not punishing it. Additionally, setting boundaries is a practice of self-compassion because it means valuing your own time and energy. This could mean saying no to extra commitments when you're already stretched thin, or communicating your needs in a relationship. For example, if you need alone time to recharge, let your family or partner know that you'll be taking 30 minutes each evening for yourself. This can be hard if you're used to people-pleasing, but remind yourself that your needs are valid. Each time you set a healthy boundary or prioritize a self-care activity, take a moment to mentally acknowledge it. I did this for my well-being. That's self-love in practice. Over time, these routines build a life that supports you rather than drains you, which naturally fosters more self-love. 6. Seeking support and connection. When to use. Ongoing, whenever needed, particularly if you feel stuck or isolated. How to do. Self-compassion doesn't mean only self-soothing in solitude. Sometimes the most compassionate act is recognizing you could use help and reaching out. This might mean talking to a close friend or family member about what you're feeling instead of bottling it up. Often, we find that loved ones are much more compassionate toward us than we are to ourselves. Hearing their perspective can help us internalize a kinder view. For example, confessing to a friend, "I feel like a failure at my new job," might lead them to say, "Oh no, you're doing great. It's just a tough learning curve." Their encouragement can challenge your self-criticism. If available, consider joining a support group or taking a workshop on self-compassion or mindfulness. Practicing in a group can reinforce that common humanity element. You see others have similar struggles. And if your self-critical habits are deeply ingrained or tied to trauma, seeking a therapist trained in compassion-focused therapy or similar approaches can be life-changing. A therapist can essentially model compassion for you until you learn to give it to yourself. Remember that reaching out is not a sign of weakness, but of courage and care. Humans are social creatures, and sometimes compassion from others helps unlock our own self-compassion. So don't hesitate to use the external tools to bolster your internal practice. They work hand in hand. You don't have to attempt all these exercises at once. It might be best to choose one or two that resonate and start there. The key is consistency and sincerity. Even a few minutes each day devoted to self-compassion can gradually shift your default mode. At first, it might feel like you're just going through motions, like reciting kind phrases that you don't fully believe. But that's okay. Treat it the way you'd train a puppy, gently and patiently redirecting your mind towards kindness each time it wanders off into harshness. Over weeks and months, these exercises can significantly build your capacity for self-love and compassion. Examples and stories. Self-compassion in real life. To illustrate how self-compassion can make a meaningful difference, let's look at a couple of scenarios, one fairly everyday situation and one deeper, more transformative example. These stories show the contrast between a self-critical approach and a self-compassionate approach, highlighting improvements in quality of life when self-kindness is practiced. Everyday example, the self-critical student versus the self-compassionate student. Meet James, a college student who just got the results of his midterm exam in a tough class. James scored below average, and immediately a voice in his head screams, "You're so stupid. How could you screw this up? You're never going to succeed in this major." He spends the rest of the day in a gloom, replaying his mistakes on the exam and even avoiding friends because he feels ashamed. That night, instead of studying, which he had planned, he ends up binge-watching shows to numb the disappointment, all the while internally berating himself for procrastinating again. By the next day, James feels demotivated and anxious about the class, and his confidence is shaken. This is James under the sway of self-criticism. His initial setback snowballed into a spiral that actually impeded constructive action. Now meet Maria, another student in the same class who also scored below average on the midterm. Maria is disappointed and initially starts to panic that she has messed up. But Maria has been practicing self-compassion. She takes a few deep breaths and consciously reframes the situation. She tells herself, "Okay, this is hard. It makes sense that I'm upset. But lots of students struggle with this subject. I'm not the only one. I did what I could with the time I had. Now, what can I learn from this?" She gives herself a mental pat on the back for trying and acknowledges that one exam doesn't define her abilities. That evening, Maria allows herself a short break to relax and soothe her frazzled nerves, a walk and a hot shower, and then calmly reviews her exam to see where she went wrong. She realizes she needs to adjust her study methods. She reaches out to a friend who did well and asks for tips, and decides to visit the professor during office hours for guidance. Maria goes to bed feeling determined, but not defeated. She's treated the experience as a learning opportunity. Over the next weeks, she studies smarter, and even when she hits snags, she reminds herself, "It's okay, I'm improving bit by bit." By the final exam, Maria's score improves significantly. The difference between James and Maria's approaches is clear. Maria's self-compassion didn't make her complacent about her grade. Rather, it kept her emotionally balanced and curious enough to take steps to improve. James's harsh approach drained his motivation and joy, leading him to avoidance. Beyond grades, Maria's overall stress level was lower, and she maintained her self-esteem, whereas James felt demoralized and anxious. This everyday example shows how self-compassion can change the trajectory of a fairly common life challenge, turning it from a self-esteem crisis into a manageable problem with a plan. Deeper example, healing from a critical past. Consider the story of Aisha. Aisha is a 40-year-old woman who, for as long as she can remember, has lived with a very harsh inner critic. She grew up in a family where love was conditional on achievement. If she got top grades or awards, her parents showered praise, but if she fell short, even slightly, they would ask, "What happened? Why not 100%?" with clear disappointment. They also had a habit of using belittling names like lazy or crybaby whenever Aisha showed signs of struggle or emotion. As an adult, Aisha excelled in many ways. She has a good job, she's seen as reliable and competent, but inside, she feels never good enough. Any mistake at work triggers intense self-criticism. I'm an idiot. They're going to find out I'm a fraud. In relationships, if anything goes wrong, she immediately blames herself. It's exhausting. And over the years, Aisha has battled periods of depression and anxiety, fueled by this relentless self-judgment and underlying belief that I'm only as good as my last success. One day, Aisha attends a personal development seminar where the speaker talks about self-compassion. It's a new concept to her. At first, she feels skeptical. It sounds a bit too soft. But something resonates when the speaker says, "Notice if you talk to yourself in ways you would never talk to someone you care about." Aisha realizes she is brutal to herself, far more than she'd ever be to a friend. She decides to read Dr. Wow, Kristin Neff's book on self-compassion, and starts trying some exercises, albeit warily. The first time Aisha places a hand on her heart and says, "I'm here for you. It's okay," she actually bursts into tears. It feels uncomfortable, yet releases a deep well of sadness. This is backdraft, years of pent-up pain at not receiving that kind of kindness. But Aisha persists gently. Each morning she spends a few minutes in meditation repeating kind phrases. She catches herself during the day when the critic pipes up. For instance, when she missed a deadline, instead of lashing herself internally, she took a brief walk and whispered, "It's all right. You've been under a lot of pressure. Let's see how to fix this. You're still a valuable person." She also joined an online support group where people share self-compassion journey stories, which helped her feel less alone in her struggles. Over months, Aisha experiences a remarkable change. She reports that the constant knot of anxiety in her chest has loosened. She's more forgiving of her mistakes and, interestingly, is actually performing better at work now because she's not paralyzed by fear of failure. Her colleagues notice she seems happier and more confident. In her personal life, Aisha sets some boundaries with family, something she never dared to do, explaining that she's working on being kinder to herself. While her parents don't fully understand, Aisha's own understanding that she deserves kindness has profoundly shifted her outlook. One day, after a minor argument with her partner, Aisha did something new. Instead of immediately assuming, "It's my fault, I'm a terrible partner," she took a moment to reflect and realized her feelings mattered too. She calmly discussed them with her partner, leading to a deeper intimacy. Aisha's quality of life improved in ways that are hard to measure. A general sense of peace she never had, the ability to enjoy her successes without the immediate not good enough voice, and resilience to handle setbacks. She had a health scare at one point, and noted that treating herself kindly through it made it much less traumatic. Her story demonstrates the deeper transformation self-compassion can bring, especially for someone healing from a long history of self-criticism. What once felt like an ingrained part of her, "I'm just hard on myself by nature," turned out to be a habit that could be changed with patience and practice. These examples, though simplified, show concrete improvements: less anxiety, more motivation, better relationships, and a kinder internal life. Whether it's a small daily challenge or a profound personal healing journey, self-compassion proves to be a powerful catalyst for positive change. It's not magic or an overnight fix. James could become more like Maria, and anyone with Aisha's background can make strides, but it happens gradually. Yet even small shifts yield benefits. You might think of self-compassion as changing the direction of your internal compass just a few degrees toward kindness. The trajectory of your life experiences can end up vastly better over time, as these stories suggest. Long-term effects of practicing self-compassion and self-love. Developing self-compassion and self-love is like making an investment in your future well-being. With regular practice, the changes that start small, maybe you notice you're a bit less stressed or a bit more accepting of mistakes, accumulate into significant long-term benefits. Let's look at some of the enduring effects that researchers and individuals report from sustained self-compassion practice. Stronger and more stable self-esteem. Interestingly, self-compassion provides a healthier basis for self-esteem than the conventional achievement-based self-esteem many of us are used to. Instead of your self-worth rising and falling only with success or others' approval, self-compassion fosters a stable sense of worth that endures even when external circumstances aren't perfect. This doesn't mean you walk around thinking you're flawless. Rather, you understand you are worthy and enough despite being imperfect. Studies have shown that self-compassion leads to greater emotional stability and resilience than self-esteem based on ego or comparison. In practical terms, someone who practices self-love regularly might find that a critique at work or a rejection like not getting a job or a date doesn't utterly devastate their self-esteem as it might have in the past. They recover faster because at a fundamental level they still respect and care for themselves. This stable self-esteem also reduces the need to constantly seek validation. You become more secure in who you are, which feels liberating. Better mental health and resilience. One of the most well-documented effects of self-compassion is its association with reduced anxiety, depression, and stress. As noted earlier, people high in self-compassion tend to be less likely to be depressed or anxious, and more likely to be optimistic and satisfied with life. Over the long run, practicing self-compassion is like building an inner emotional support system that buffers you against life's ups and downs. Instead of every setback triggering a spiral, you have an innate way to comfort and encourage yourself, which means you can face challenges without falling apart. Research even suggests that self-compassionate individuals handle traumatic events or major life crises with more resilience. They grieve and heal rather than getting stuck in self-blame or hopelessness. For example, in studies of veterans, those with higher self-compassion had lower levels of PTSD symptoms, presumably because they could integrate painful experiences without as much self-judgment. In everyday life, resilience might show up as being able to laugh at yourself and move on, whereas before you'd ruminate for days over an embarrassment. Also, long-term self-compassion practice has been linked to healthy behaviors. People take better care of their health when they value themselves, creating a positive cycle of mental and physical well-being. Improved relationships and social connectedness. It might sound counterintuitive that how you treat yourself affects how you relate to others, but it's profoundly true. First, when you are compassionate inwardly, you tend to have more bandwidth to be compassionate outwardly. You're not so consumed by your own shame or anger, so you can be present for others. People who love themselves in a healthy way don't need to constantly seek reassurance or hide their flaws, which leads to more authentic and satisfying relationships. In romantic relationships, recent research has shown that self-compassion can even make the relationship itself happier. One study of couples found that individuals who are more forgiving of their own shortcomings, self-compassionate, contribute to greater relationship satisfaction for both partners. The reasoning is that if you go easy on yourself, you're likely to go easy on your partner too, creating a kinder dynamic. Moreover, being self-compassionate means you're less likely to be clingy or demanding out of insecurity. You're not looking for your partner to constantly prop up your self-esteem, which is a relief for them. As that study noted, men in particular benefited when their partner was self-compassionate, possibly because a self-compassionate partner takes responsibility for their emotions without projecting blame. In friendships and family relations, self-love can reduce conflict. For example, if you make a mistake that hurts someone, You can apologize without excessive defensiveness because you're not making it an indictment of your whole worth. Additionally, practicing common humanity, a component of self-compassion, often increases feelings of connection. You truly realize everyone struggles and that empathy extends both ways. You might feel less lonely in your struggles, making you more open to support and also more supportive. Changed brain and habits. Earlier we talked about neuroplasticity. Long-term, consistent self-compassion practice can actually create lasting changes in the brain. People who meditate regularly on compassion, for instance, show stronger activation in areas related to empathy and emotion regulation. This means that even when life throws curveballs, their brains more readily default to calm and compassionate responses instead of panic or self-attack. It's as if you've trained an inner caregiver to show up when needed. Habit-wise, you'll likely find that your knee-jerk reactions transform. Where you once might immediately say, I'm so stupid under stress," after a year of practice you might automatically sigh and say, "This is tough, but I can handle it." It becomes second nature. Another subtle long-term effect is improved apasya. Decision-making. When you love and respect yourself, you tend to make choices that align with your well-being. You might distance yourself from toxic relationships or pursue a career change that fulfills you, whereas a less self-compassionate you might have stayed in situations out of self-doubt or a sense of unworthiness. In that way, self-love can be life-altering, steering the very direction of your life toward environments and people that nurture you. Greater life satisfaction and authenticity. All of the above culminates in an overall higher quality of life. When you practice self-compassion over the long term, you cultivate an inner climate of friendliness. Imagine waking up in the morning, and instead of your mind bombarding you with worries or self-criticism, it greets you with a gentle, "Let's do our best today. No matter what, I'm on your side." This sets the tone for days that are less filled with internal strife. Challenges will still come, but you meet them as your own ally. People often report feeling more authentically themselves as they develop self-love. That's because you're no longer constantly editing or rejecting parts of yourself. You can acknowledge your quirks and flaws with humor and understanding. This authenticity can lead you to pursue what truly matters to you, not just what impresses others, whether that's creativity, relationships, or personal goals. You become more aligned with your values when you believe you're worthy of following them. For instance, someone who always wanted to write a novel but never did, for fear of not being good enough, might finally start writing each day, kindly encouraging themselves rather than expecting perfection from page 1. The long-term result? Perhaps a completed novel and the fulfillment of a dream. But even if not, the journey would be so much kinder and enjoyable than it would have been with an inner critic at the helm. In essence, the long-term effects of self-compassion and self-love touch every aspect of your life. Your mind, less negative chatter, more peace. Your emotions, more positive feelings, resilience in the face of the negative ones. Your body, lower stress-related issues, better self-care. Your relationships, more harmony and genuine connection. And your overall outlook, feeling connected to humanity and finding joy in the present. It's like planting a seedling and watching a strong, beautiful tree grow. At first, changes are small, but eventually, the shade of that tree can cover a lot of ground, providing comfort and strength through seasons of life. Before wrapping up, it's important to note that self-compassion is a continuous journey. Even people who practice for years have moments where their inner critic pipes up. The difference is they can recognize it and consciously shift gears. Life will always test us, but with self-love in our toolkit, we are far better equipped to handle whatever comes. Now, let's conclude with a summary and a note of motivation to inspire you and all of us to keep cultivating this invaluable quality. Summary and motivation. The life-changing power of being kind to yourself. Cultivating self-compassion and self-love is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, and by extension, the world around you. We began by defining these concepts. Self-compassion as the act of extending kindness and understanding to oneself in moments of suffering or failure, and self-love as an ongoing appreciation of one's own worth and well-being. Though it's natural to be kinder to others than to ourselves, we explored why this is often the case. from psychological conditioning and fear-based beliefs to cultural messages that self-kindness is a weakness. We delved into the fascinating science of how self-criticism triggers our threat defenses, flooding us with stress hormones, whereas self-compassion engages our care systems, releasing calming feel-good hormones and helping regulate our emotions. The difference literally shows up in our brains and bodies, influencing our health. We identified common obstacles like perfectionism, past trauma, comparison, and misconceptions that can make self-love feel difficult. Yet, as we discussed in The Paradox of Self-Kindness, those very obstacles stand on shaky ground, because being hard on ourselves isn't actually the key to success or morality that many assume. In fact, learning to coach ourselves with encouragement rather than cruelty leads to better outcomes, more motivation, less fear, and greater resilience. It's like discovering that the gentlest path up the mountain also turns out to be the quickest and most enjoyable. Practically, we went through numerous exercises, from simple daily habits like mindful breathing and compassionate self-talk, to deeper practices like journaling and meditation that can help train the self-compassion muscle. It's empowering to know that these are skills one can build. No one is stuck with a merciless inner critic forever. It can be retrained. We saw through examples and stories how lives can change when someone shifts from self-judgment to self-kindness. Even small everyday instances like Maria studying smarter after comforting herself about a bad grade, and profound personal transformations like Isha healing from a lifetime of shame show that self-compassion is not just a nice theory. It works in real life, improving both internal experience and external outcomes. In the long run, investing time and effort into developing self-love pays off in a multitude of ways. You become more emotionally resilient, mentally healthy, and authentically you. Your relationship with yourself sets the tone for all other relationships. When that foundational relationship is loving, it ripples outward. Imagine a world where people spoke to themselves with the same empathy and forgiveness they offer to their best friends. It would be a world with far less unnecessary anger, stress, and despair. By improving how we treat ourselves, we indirectly bring more patience and kindness to others. In this way, self-compassion isn't selfish at all. It's a form of self-care that enables us to show up as better friends, partners, parents, and citizens. If you're wondering whether it's worth making the effort to change habits of self-criticism that might feel ingrained, remember that you've likely been practicing self-critique for many years. A bit of persistence in practicing the opposite can yield significant shifts. Sure, at first it might feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable to be gentle with yourself. Your mind might rebel, saying you're letting yourself off easy. But keep at it, and you'll start to notice something. You aren't losing your edge or turning into a narcissist. You're becoming happier, more balanced, and still just as capable, if not more so, of achieving your goals. The scary things self-criticism warned you about don't come to pass. Instead, new opportunities open up as you trust yourself more. You might find courage to try things you avoided when you were ruled by fear of not being good enough. You might find that failures don't crush you like they used to, and successes feel a lot sweeter because you can actually pause to appreciate your own part in them. Ultimately, self-compassion and self-love are about befriending yourself. You are the one person you spend every second of your life with, your own constant companion. When that companionship becomes supportive and loving, life's inevitable challenges become easier to bear, and its joys become more accessible. As the Buddha wisely taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This isn't a mantra of selfishness. It's a reminder that you are worthy of the same compassion you so freely give to others, and that treating yourself with love is the foundation for a fulfilling life. So as you move forward, consider this an invitation. Try being a better friend to yourself. Start with small acts, a kind word in the mirror in the morning, or a forgiving smile when you drop the ball, and build from there. On days when you revert to old habits of self-critique, don't criticize yourself for that either. That's just the inner critic in a sneaky disguise. Instead, gently guide yourself back to kindness, again and again. Over time, you'll likely notice the voice of self-doubt and harshness losing its power, and a new voice, warmer, wiser, and more encouraging, becoming your guiding coach through life. In developing self-compassion and self-love, you are not just learning a skill, you are fundamentally changing your relationship with the person in the mirror. And that relationship, when grounded in compassion, can sustain you through anything. It's a journey well worth taking. May you be kind to yourself. May you recognize your own worth. May you experience the freedom and happiness that come from loving the person you are, as you are, while you grow into all you wish to become. Your future self is already thanking you for starting today.